I am Dr. Adrienne Silver.
And I am Dr. Prapreet Kaur.
From the ER to the great outdoors, from clinic to the quiet corners of the mind, this is Life in Practice. Episode number 1, Exploring Wilderness Medicine with Dr. Tate Higgins. Thank you so much, Tate, for joining me today for our very first podcast. So let's start by telling all of us a little bit about yourself and training, how long you've been with KP, and just tell us about yourself.
I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be the guinea pig of this exciting project. My name is Tate Higgins. I'm a physician here at Kaiser, emergency medicine physician. I've been with Kaiser Santa Rosa for 1 year. My residency was at Stanford University. I'm here today to talk about some wilderness medicine. Background, kind of what led me to medicine in general was actually through wilderness medicine. So it's a specialty within the House of Medicine, or a little corner that I'm really passionate and interested in. I was a river guide and a mountain guide in my 20s. I was teaching college English and working in the summers outdoors as a professional expedition leader. And through that, I was interested in gaining some more medical training in order to take care of people on bigger, longer, more extreme trips, international work. And so I did a wilderness EMT course with a group called NOLS, the National Outdoor Leadership School, and left that course really excited about applying wilderness medicine skills and also excited about just taking care of patients in general. So started working as an EMT and eventually started teaching wilderness medicine and spent the next, almost 10 years doing a combination of guiding wilderness trips, working as an EMT, and teaching wilderness medicine. And then through that, I got to meet some really interesting emergency medicine physicians who encouraged me to look into pursuing more. And so I'm a non-traditional path, came back to medicine after 10 years in the backcountry, and now really interested in continuing to combine those two things.
So, in your experience over those years, what was the first time that you felt like you needed to use your skills out in the woods and in the field?
I was thinking about some memorable experiences and rescues, and what's, I think, foundationally wilderness medicine. I think about it in a couple different ways, defining what it is and how we apply it. And one is time. And so when we think about wilderness medicine, it's extended patient contact time. And then the other is having to improvise equipment. The other is having to make independent decisions. Often you're out there on your own. You don't get to call a specialist. You don't get to call for backup as easily. And then I think about the environment. Wilderness medicine, the environment is always a factor. It's never neutral and it's never ideal. And then the final big one that we really think about in wilderness medicine is prevention. Trying to anticipate and prevent injuries and illness. And so the reality is we spend a lot of time training and a lot of energy prepping and a lot of energy anticipating injury and illness early and preventing it. I had the unique opportunity early in my wilderness medicine work to work in Nepal. And so I got to guide treks in Nepal at high altitude to Everest Base Camp. I've never climbed Everest. I haven't been past base camp, but I got to go many times to base camp and lead folks in that high altitude environment. And that's the place where I had one of my first kind of crashing patients that we had to manage overnight that needed an emergency helicopter evacuation. So we had a patient that came down with high altitude pulmonary edema in a tea house and just on the edge of Mount Everest up in the Himalayas. And that's my first emergency helicopter evac where I was the wilderness medicine provider, making those decisions, improvising the situation, dealing with the environment.
Can you go into some detail about how you managed that? And did it feel like you didn't have the right supplies that you needed?
You never have enough. Foundations of wilderness medicine are taking pre-hospital foundations and applying them to austere environments. And the things that we learn in front country medicine, checking vitals, doing full assessments, managing ABCs, it's the same foundations that you would use in a pre-hospital setting anywhere, but then you have this extra challenge of time and environment and improvising. For this particular case, we had a patient that had progressive shortness of breath on exertion, started developing a productive cough. We were traveling at altitude, so we had prepped the team and our equipment for possible high altitude illnesses. And so high altitude pulmonary edema is a big one that we're on the lookout for. We had spent the day going up to about 17,000 feet. And then our sleeping altitude, which is a big factor in altitude illness, was over 15,000 feet the couple of nights around this presentation. But luckily, we were prepared with some basic things like a pulse ox. We had access to oxygen, which is unique in the wilderness, but because we were on this altitude environment, and we had a Gamow bag, which is a portable hyperbaric chamber that can be used to treat high altitude illness. So luckily we were prepared the best we could be. What we didn't have was electricity, monitoring, nursing staff. We had a first aid kit that was big that had some basic medications, including the ones we needed for altitude. But we rallied the team and we gathered some help with my staff that was there with me. And we took shifts monitoring the patient by hand and feeling a pulse and using a watch and using a finger pulse ox. And luckily the patient did well overnight. Then we were able to arrange for a helicopter evacuation early the next day.
So couldn't you just have brought them down to a low altitude? Isn't that the cure for most high altitude issues?
Yeah, it's a good point. Going to lower altitude is what they needed for sure. If you bring up is if you're feeling sick at altitude or you have a sick patient, we assume that altitude is a factor. Of course, everything else happens to altitude too, but the treatment for altitude illness is to remove the altitude, which means to descend. And our big life threats at altitude are fluid and swelling in the brain, altitude cerebral edema, patients that have balance problems or severe headaches or mental status changes need to go down right away. And we have lung problems, altitude pulmonary edema, which is shortness of breath, dyspnea, hypoxemia. Those patients also got to go down.
It's random, right? It can happen regardless of your age or how good a shape you're in, although I imagine if you are older, you have a higher risk. Is that correct?
You're exactly right. It seems to be driven mostly by genetics as far as if we can account for all the other variables. We know that certain things put you at higher risk. The faster you climb and the higher you go quickly, the higher risk of developing one of these illnesses or life threats. But being fit probably make you enjoy your trip more, but it's not going to protect you from the physiology of high altitude.
Was that the craziest environment that you think you've worked in or had to provide care?
I think high altitude is one of the really interesting, unique environments in wilderness medicine. The high altitude environment is one of the most challenging because it just the terrain, being in the high mountains, the challenge of evac, the unpredictability, and then of course you have the extreme weather that comes in the mountains.
So what do you think for those of us that are not wilderness trained but love to spend time out in the woods? What's essentially you should always have, and then as a physician, what things might also be helpful to be able to help others?
Yeah, great question. I think spending a little time before you go on a trip, even if it's just for a day, to think about what could go wrong. Are we prepared for it? What equipment do we need? So just having that pause before leaving the house goes a long way. And then I think everybody that's doing any significant time outdoors or anyone that wants to assume a role of taking care of emergency situations outdoors should have some training. There's great conferences around the country. They're always either at a beautiful place to ski in the winter or a beautiful place to hike and recreate in the spring and summer. There's a group called Wilderness and Travel Medicine that does conferences around that a lot of the Santa Rosa Kaiser docs have been to. There's a Wilderness Medicine Society. And I think engaging in the thought process a little bit and thinking about like, how would I take care of a situation? So playing that what if game before you leave. And then it comes down to some basic first aid supplies, some basic survival supplies, and then a plan to either get out of there or to communicate if you need to call for help. But I think the way we can boil it down is that you should have one. The first aid kit has to be customized to the trip, the people, the length. There's no perfect first aid kit. And so a lot of times what I think works well is to find like a commercial first aid kit that's in a container that's the right size and has some things that you like in it from REI or online or wherever, and then bring it home, open it up. There's going to be some stuff in there that's not useful to you. There's going to be things missing, and then you can customize it for your needs. It's interesting as a physician, we start thinking about first aid kits in the wilderness and pre-hospital medicine. And we have all this training and skill set, and we start thinking about the what if scenarios. And it's really easy to start building a first aid kit that is huge and
Gonna say you got
unpractical.
snake bites, you need your epi, you need your I was just thinking like portable crash cart, right?
The reality is you can't bring everything. You can't bring the crash cart. You can't bring all the medicines. You can't bring all the splinting supplies. Even as my training has advanced and my experience has advanced, my first aid kit has gotten smaller. It's gotten more efficient. And part of that is time and experience. And then realizing what can we actually do in the backcountry. So when I think about it as a physician, I think about what are the things that I can't improvise that are important to treat, like a life threat, something that I could reverse. And so you mentioned epi. Having epinephrine is one of the few medications in a wilderness setting that could be life-saving. If I'm on an international trip and don't have access to a pharmacy and I'm going to be in an environment where I'm worried about infections and I'm going to be out for days or weeks, then opens up this whole other category of, do we need to be carrying medicines to treat common infections? But my personal first aid kit, just to keep it simple, I think ABCs is where I start, like airway, breathing, circulation. And so do I have the ability to manage airway and breathing and control bleeding? And most of that, to be honest, is more skills and training than equipment. Like some barrier devices, protection, gloves, masks, those would be great to have. But airway management in a backcountry setting is positioning. And if you can get good head positioning, you can probably take care of it. And I carry NPAs and OPAs to help with that. And then it's all the CPR stuff we learn, rescue breathing and chest compressions. And the reality is, if you're doing chest compressions in a wilderness setting, the survival rate, with the exception of like cold water drowning in an otherwise healthy person, the survival's like very unlikely. But bleeding control is a big one. And so when I think about circulation, I think about, do I have the ability to control bleeding? And this goes back to training. And there's a great course called Stop the Bleed that talks about how to manage life-threatening bleeds. And I think it's a 2 or 4 hour course that people can keep an eye out for. It's offered locally frequently. Do I have the ability to put on a tourniquet if that's necessary? The things we mostly deal with in the backcountry setting are cuts, scrapes, sprains, strains, environmental stuff, minor stuff that if we have some equipment, we may be able to make patients more comfortable. So have a first aid kit and think about what you're going to use it for, and realize that you can't have every single medicine and every single Band-Aid. And
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think what you said in the very beginning, which is just to think about where you're going, how long are you going to be out there? From my experience in Colorado, people would go out and have inadequate clothing. They wouldn't realize that even if it's 80 degrees out, you get to the top of a mountain and it can be hailing and snowing. So I think that is such a good point for everybody that wants to get involved in this is, like you said, like the basics and being prepared and having different scenarios in your head that you can prepare for: extra food, extra clothing, things like that. Because I imagine many things that happen out there are because people are not adequately prepared for the
Yeah.
environment that they're going into.
Yeah, it's so true. And lots of our classic rescue stories always starts with I was just going for the afternoon. So I didn't bother bringing my rain jacket, or I was
Right.
just doing this. And so it's often those shorter trips, those day hikes that turn into an unexpected night out. Yeah, I think anytime you're leaving the front country, even if you're hiking Taylor Mountain, if you're just going, you should just have a brief check-in about what happens if I break my leg at the end of this trail because a rock rolls funny, and what would I do? I hate having my cell phone in the backcountry, but I'll often just turn it off, put it in a Ziploc bag, and put it in the bottom of my backpack.
I noticed the last time I was hiking, I saw there's now a feature on the phones where you can actually link to a satellite if you don't have cell service in an emergency situation. That was new to me. I hadn't realized that. There's so many remote places you don't get
Yeah.
cell coverage.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. The newer iPhones, like the last couple models, have a feature where you can get some basic satellite communication, even if you don't have tower reception, and you can at least usually get some text out. And so, yeah, thinking about
Yeah,
communication is really important. I
that
mean,
is
that can be
absolutely.
absolutely life-saving. There's times where if there's a big injury or illness in the backcountry, then you do your best on scene, but what you really need is an evacuation. And that's the ability to initiate help in an evacuation is often the difference in life and death. So some sort of communication device is really important. And the iPhone is great with the satellite. There's spot devices, there's Garmin, a couple different companies have options, but that's another just what if. Okay, what is our communication device if we need it?
Are you planning on doing any other expeditions? And do you ever bring people with you? Because they sound
Yeah,
amazing.
I'm definitely planning more expeditions and get outside as much as possible. This year, I was lucky enough. I went down to Patagonia, to Chile, and I got to teach wilderness medicine CME to a group of physicians who were down there doing some of the world's best whitewater rafting and multi-sport adventures. And I got to
Amazing.
go help out at a wilderness medicine conference in Santa Fe this year with wilderness and travel medicine, which was great. My plan is to try to continue to teach wilderness medicine and to get out and do as many expeditions as I can. My family just wrapped up. We did a week-long river trip on the Maine salmon with family and friends, which was our big end of summer trip. I have a 16-year-old and he is excited about scuba diving now. So we just did our first family scuba trip. And so it's the opposite of my high altitude
Yeah,
background. Just keep an ear out and an eye out for opportunities and keep doing trips is the key.
that's awesome. Thank you so much, Tate, for taking the time to talk to us today about wilderness medicine. I will definitely be looking up some of those conferences. They sound incredible. And I hope for everyone listening today that this was interesting and informative. Stay tuned for next month when we will have Pal Preek doing her segment on mental health and wellness. This is Life in Practice.